It's a split decision for candidates backed by Donald Trump in South Carolina's Republican primaries. Incumbent Congressman Tom Rice voted to impeach Trump. CNN projects he will lose to state lawmaker Russell Fry, who got the former president's endorsement.
Today, the conservatives in the Republican Party won. Today, Donald Trump won. And today, the voters of the 7th Congressional District won.
In South Carolina's 1st District, CNN projects incumbent Nancy Mace was able to fend off a challenge from Trump-backed Katie Arrington. Mace didn't vote to impeach Trump, but she broke with Republicans who objected to Joe Biden's election.
I also want to thank Mick Mulvaney, who endorsed my campaign early on. He helped us raise some money. He's a great fiscal conservative. I also want to thank former South Carolina Governor and UN Ambassador Nikki Haley.
And CNN projects another Trump-backed candidate will compete for a U.S. Senate seat from Nevada. Adam Laxalt is the former state attorney general and grandson of a former governor as well as senator.
I would like to thank President Donald Trump for not only believing in me, but for believing in Nevada and leading an America First movement, a movement that is alive and well today here in Nevada.
Laxalt will face incumbent Democrat Catherine Cortez Masto in November. A win for him could help tip the balance of the Senate in, of course, the Republicans' favor.
All right, let's get to some primary coverage. Republican voters in South Carolina deciding the fate of 2 House incumbents who defied former President Trump. One won, one lost in last night's primary. CNN can now project Tom Rice, the first of 10 House Republicans who voted for Trump's impeachment last year, lost to State Representative Russell Fry in the state's 7th district. Fry was endorsed by Trump, and he will clear the 50% threshold needed to avoid a runoff.
All right, the other South Carolina incumbent who defied Trump, Nancy Mace, was a clear winner in her GOP primary race. CNN projects Mace has defeated Trump-backed challenger Katie Arrington in their 3-candidate race. Mace did not vote to impeach Trump, but she voted to certify President Biden's election victory, earning Trump's wrath in that process, though the former president actually congratulated Mace on her win.
Coming up for you, how oil and human rights have Joe Biden caught between a rock and a hard place.
First, CNN on the ground with Ukrainian troops using Western weapons.
There's a problem, though. We're told there's not enough Western ammunition.
Yes, I'm Christine Romans. New Day starts right now.
Good morning to our viewers here in the United States and all around the world. It is Wednesday, June 15th. I'm John Berman with Brianna Keeler. And developing this morning, the results are in, and Donald Trump exacting a measure of revenge on Republicans who moved to impeach him. Even as the January 6th committee presents evidence they suggest points to possible crimes by the former president, Trump's political strength is still evident at the polls. Overnight, South Carolina Republican Congressman Tom Rice was defeated by a Trump-endorsed candidate. Rice was one of 10 Republicans in the House who voted to impeach the former president and one of the first to face Republican primary voters. Another race in South Carolina did not go Trump's way. Congresswoman Nancy Mace, at times a Trump critic, survived a primary challenge. And in another significant development, Republican Mayor Flores flipped a Democratic House district in South Texas. This is a pretty significant special election victory that builds on Republican gains among Latino voters in the region in the 2020 election. Joining me now is CNN senior data reporter Harry Etten. Harry, I think the marquee race last night was in South Carolina. People looking to see what would happen to this Republican who voted to impeach Donald Trump.
Yeah, looking to see what exactly would happen. And here's what happened. Look, it's not just that Tom Rice, the incumbent, got defeated by Russell Fry. I want you to take a look at the vote percentage that Tom Rice got. Look at this. He got 24.7% of the vote. He got less than 25% of the vote. This is an incumbent, a sitting member of Congress. And I think this gives you a good idea of where Republican voters are standing. When you go against Donald Trump, especially on impeachment, oh my goodness gracious, the best you can do is a quarter. This is nuts. You never see, and you very rarely, I should say, you very rarely see an incumbent just being able to pull a quarter of the primary vote. My goodness gracious.
Yeah, it's the margin here that's significant. And just to go off the board for a second, Liz Cheney is facing primary voters in Wyoming in August. So this does not necessarily bode well for her.
Oh, I would think not. And we'll cover that as the race sort of unfolds out in Wyoming. But I will say that this, I would say, is a major warning sign to Cheney in the state of Wyoming, which, of course, is a state that is even redder than basically any other.
All right, let's look at some of the other races last night. In South Carolina, there was another race that did not exactly go Trump's way.
No, it didn't go exactly Trump's way. Look, Nancy Mace did not vote to impeach Donald Trump. She was critical of him at times. She did vote to certify the election. But again, this is not exactly a very strong vote total for a sitting member of Congress. I mean, yes, much better for her than for Tom Rice. But the fact of the matter is, just 53% of the vote for a sitting member of Congress. We should, of course, keep in mind Trump backed Arrington. But just again, 53%, better than 25, but it's not exactly awesome.
That margin for an incumbent is very interesting. All right, I want to go to Texas now because there was a primary race there. Well, it was an open special election seat there, which may mean something different.
Look, this is more about where we are in the nation, I think, the national environment. And this is a district that Joe Biden won by 4 points, but Hillary Clinton had won it by, I believe it was 21 points, or at least a little bit more than 20. And then look here, what happened last night. The Republican, 51% of the vote. Dan Sanchez, the Democrat, 43% of the vote. You need to get 50% of the vote plus one to avoid a runoff at this particular point. Although we don't have the check mark there, it looks like Flores is, in fact, going to get over that 50% mark. And this, to me, is an indication of how strong the national environment is for Republicans. It's very, very good. And more than that, we have seen in a lot of the polling some drag among Hispanics for Democrats. And this is an indication this is a majority Hispanic district. The fact that a Republican did this well here points to the sign that Democrats have with Hispanics.
All right, I want to go back to Trump coattails here, particularly again as the January 6th committee is suggesting possible crimes committed by the former president. What you see in Nevada, the Secretary of State race, again, the person who will control elections there, the Republican who won the primary, is someone who was pushing to overturn election results in Nevada.
Yeah, Jim Marchant. And again, you keep saying it's not just about the check mark, it's about the margin. Easily defeating the competition here. I'll pull up my pen here. Look at this. Look at this margin here. 38%, the nearest competitor just south of 20%, an 18-point margin. Marchant is on the fringe of the fringe of the fringe when it comes to the 2020 election. And he was easily able to defeat his nearest opponent here.
And then another Trump-supported candidate did win the Republican nomination for Senate, which matters for possible control of the overall Senate coming up.
Yeah, not particularly close either. Adam Laxalt here, the former Attorney General, winning by about 20 percentage points. And, again, you point out this race, we said yesterday, is not just important because of who wins the primary. This is a prime pickup opportunity for Republicans in the Senate. Cortez Masto, the Democratic incumbent. If Republicans are able to pick up this Senate seat, then they are probably going to win the United States Senate. So this is not the last time that we're going to be visiting Adam Laxalt in the state of Nevada.
Ariane, thanks for staying up late and getting up early.
Well, my pleasure. Anytime with you, my friend.
Right. Brianna?
Liz Cheney.
The results are in, and Donald Trump exacting a measure of revenge on Republicans who moved to impeach him. And this is happening even as the January 6th committee presents evidence that they suggest points to possible crimes by the former president. Trump's political strength is evident. Overnight, South Carolina Republican Congressman Tom Rice was defeated by a Trump-endorsed candidate, and he lost by a lot. He was one of 10 Republicans in the House who voted to impeach the former president, and among the first to face Republican primary voters. We should note another race in South Carolina did not go Trump's way. Congresswoman Nancy Mace, who at times was a Trump critic, survived the primary challenge. Other events on primary night, Republican Mayor Flores flipped a Democratic House district in South Texas. This is a special election victory that builds on Republican gains among Latino voters in the region in the 2020 election. Joining us now, CNN senior political analyst John Avlon. Tom Rice voted to impeach Donald Trump, just defeated in a primary by a lot, 24% of the vote. An incumbent getting 24% of the vote in a primary.
It is a brutal loss for Tom Rice, who took a profile and courage stance on Donald Trump's election lies and paid the price. But here's the reality check I want to give, because I know South Carolina, as you all know. This district where he is, around Myrtle Beach, was heavily pro-Trump. So not only do you have a low turnout election, Republican primary, but Horry County, where Myrtle Beach is, for example, part of the district, went 2-1 for Donald Trump. So if you take on Donald Trump in that district, you are looking for trouble, and Tom Rice got it. Now let's shift down one district to South Carolina, one where Nancy Mace, as you pointed out, took her first vote to reject an attempt to overturn the election. Then spent a lot of time doing prevent defense. Well, she won her primary. Key difference is that Joe Biden won Charleston County by 12 points. So you got to look at the context. People are going to say, oh, all the difference here is the strategies they took in the various ways they took were being defiant to Donald Trump. Look at the underlying dynamics of the district, and that'll tell you what's really going on.
Although I will say, Nancy Mace, and again, she's running for re-election, barely won re-election as a Republican,
against a woman who'd won the Republican nomination 4 years ago, ran as a hardcore Trumper, and still lost in this environment.
Let's take a look at Nevada, right? And other places where people who are adherents of the big lie found a toehold. Specifically, we're looking at the Republican Nevada Secretary of State candidate. And what is that going to mean when, if we look a little farther south to New Mexico, for instance, you have a county in New Mexico where local officials would not certify the election because they believe baseless claims about Dominion voting machines. Now, the county commissioner in that county says, no, that's totally baseless. And it seems like eventually they're going to be forced, including one local official who's an insurrectionist. But imagine if they weren't forced ultimately to do this. Imagine if they had a Secretary of State like the Nevada candidate. What does this portend for future elections?
Bad things. And I'm glad you mentioned that New Mexico case, because it shows you the chaos that can happen if you have outright insurrectionists, election deniers in positions overseeing elections. Now, look, this Nevada candidate, you've got an election denier potentially running elections in a major swing state. It also could potentially be a problem for Republicans, even as the pendulum swings towards an off-year election, if they put forward candidates who are not acceptable to the moderate majority of voters. So that's a real test. Now, Adam Laxalt won the Republican primary last night. He's a big lie believer. He's also got a name that is gold in the state of Nevada. And he'd lost an election for governor, been previously AG. But you're right to point out the critical importance of these Secretary of State races, because that's where the constitutional crisis will come on a state-by-state level. So you are sign of coming attractions with those kind of elections.
You know, in Texas, the special election there, very interesting, because what you have is a state where Republicans are hoping to make gains among Latino voters, and you have a candidate winning a seat that has been in Democrats' hands for some time.
Absolutely. Look, this is a seat that is 85% Hispanic, has been drawn to be Democrat. Now, this special election, because the Democrat incumbent decided to take off, was very low turnout, 29,000 voters compared to around 200,000 voters who turn out in a typical general. But the fact that a Republican won it, even for a few months, is a huge brushback pitch to Democrats, especially on the back of what you just referred to, which is Hispanics moving more Republican in 2020, particularly in Laredo County, down on the Mexico border on the western side of the state. This is on the eastern side. So this is just more example that Democrats need to wake up to the fact that they cannot take Hispanic votes for granted. We saw it in Florida, entirely different demographic of Hispanics in Texas. But this is something, even though it's going to take place in a few months and it's a low turnout special election, major brushback pitch for Democrats.
Yeah, it is a wake-up call for them
Big
today.
time.
John Avlon, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Primaries are coming in as we wait for final counts in some key races. Right now, we're watching closely Texas's 34th congressional district, where Democrat Dan Sanchez has conceded the race to Republican Mayra Flores.
A win for Flores will be a major victory for Republicans in the House and would be the first congressional flip for either party since 2020. CNN senior data reporter Harry Enton joins us. Harry, good morning.
Morning.
Talk about the significance here, flipping a Democratic House district in South Texas. A big deal.
It's a huge deal. And, we'll start right there. I know you pointed out the results there. I'm going to include all the candidates that were running in this race. And this, to me, is what's so impressive, is that Flores gets that 51%. And she got to over 51% now with 97% of the estimated vote in, despite the fact that there was another Republican running who got about 2% of the votes. So you add the Republicans together, and you get to about 53%. Now, why is this so impressive? Why is it so impressive that Republicans did so well in this district? Well, take a look at this vote history here. And basically, you can say, okay, the Republican performances in Texas 34. Trump only got 38% of the vote in 2016. Then in 2018, the Republican candidate for House got 40%. Then Trump got up to look at that, 48%, and Flores now 51%. There has been strong movement among Hispanics in South Texas towards the Republican Party, and last night was just the latest example of that.
And Harry, there were some other big races last night in swing states like South Carolina, Nevada. What else stood out?
Well, we'll go right to the great state of South Carolina. And I think this is really interesting because we had one incumbent, Nancy Mace, who survived a challenge from a Trump-backed Katie Arrington. Mace was very critical of Trump but did not vote to impeach him. Turns out you can be critical of Trump and still survive your primary challenge. However, if you impeach Trump, as Tom Rice said, look at this. He only got 25% of the vote. The Trump-backed Russell Fry got 51% of the vote. My goodness gracious, an incumbent just getting 25% of the vote. Talking about Trump-backed candidates, let's go over to Nevada. Adam Laxalt getting 56% of the vote. He was, in fact, endorsed by Donald Trump. The Trump endorsement still meaning something in Republican primaries, especially when incumbents aren't running. But here's the thing about Nevada that I think is so important. This is going to be a huge state in the fall, the general election Senate, currently controlled by the Democrats. Catherine Cortez Masto. The betting odds of who is going to win right now, it's fairly close, but look at that. Adam Laxalt with about a 63% chance of winning that race according to the betting market. So this is going to be a key race, not just last night, but going forward to the fall. If Republicans are able to win and flip Nevada, they probably will, in fact, flip the Senate chamber.
No one better to explain things, right, Alex? Sorry to step on. No one better at drawing arrows and percentage points.
I have horrible handwriting. That's the only thing that I will know. My handwriting is atrocious, but fortunately this technology is decent enough that I can make things relatively clear. And of course, even if you can't read my writing, you can still read the nice block letters from the computers. Thank God for computers. Otherwise, I'd be screwed.
Yeah, you're just trying to take it all in. He's going so fast. You're just trying to remember all this.
I'm trying to get in all these different races. I'm trying to inform the audience. Hopefully, I went slow enough but fast enough so I was able to accomplish both tasks.
I'm looking over my shoulder because he's actually right there. The magic.
You're right over there. But yeah, this is the magic of TV. You'd have no idea where I was. I could be in Antarctica for all you know.
Okay, let's do that tomorrow.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Harry.
All right, Harry, thanks so much.
Bye.
Well, here to discuss all of this is the senior columnist for the Daily Beast, Matt Lewis, and national political correspondent for Time Magazine, Molly Ball. Thank you both so much for joining me this morning. Matt, I want to start with you and where Harry left off in Nevada. In terms of the integrity of the next elections, both the midterms coming up in the fall and 2024, how they're conducted, so much of that is up to the secretaries of state. And in Nevada, there was a critical race. Jim Marchant, a former state lawmaker who has bought into the big lie, continues to push it. He's now the GOP nominee for Secretary of State for the fall. How much are we seeing this in other pivotal states in terms of these Secretary of State candidates who believe in the big lie, and how dangerous is it?
I think it's super dangerous, and it's mixed, right? We saw down in Georgia a couple weeks ago, Donald Trump failed to take out Raffensperger, his enemy, the Republican Secretary of State in Georgia, who would not go along with the big lie. So Trump doesn't always win. Sometimes he endorses people or he tries to take people out and they lose. But, if you're trying to flip an election, you only need a few states sometimes, right? And so what we're seeing happen in Nevada is happening other places. We're seeing Republican, Trump-backed, in often cases, Trump-backed Republicans who support the big lie, who are winning these Secretary of State primaries in certain states, including, I think, Michigan, Nevada, you just mentioned, and New Mexico. And then you have, like in Pennsylvania, the Republican primary nominee for governor, Mastriano, would pick the Secretary of State in Pennsylvania. So now we're up to what? At least 4 Republican nominees that have a chance of winning in November. And 2 years later, they could be instrumental in determining whether to send a different slate of electors than their state, than their state elected. So I really see this in a way as almost like sleeper agents, right? I mean, these people they're not being secretive about it. They're being transparent about their support of Trump and the fact that they don't believe Biden won in 2020. But I'm talking about people who are going to be put in place potentially and could be activated if and when the circumstance calls for it.
Could be activated. Molly, you heard Matt there saying that Trump doesn't always win. When we look at what happened in South Carolina last night, Tom Rice was one of 10 Republicans to vote to impeach Trump, and he suffered a brutal loss. Meanwhile, Nancy Mace, who did vote to certify Joe Biden's victory and ran against someone who Trump had supported, she won her primary. So what does that tell us about the Trump sway, if you will, in these primary races?
Right. Well, there was an obvious difference between those two candidates, and it was, number one, the endorsement vote, the impeachment vote, as you mentioned, and that's a clear red line for Trump. I think that category of the Republicans who voted for impeachment has a special place in Trump's mind, and he is especially focused on those races. So Tom Rice, the next one will be Peter Meijer in Michigan, who is also still running for re-election despite having voted to impeach Trump, and then a couple of Republicans in Washington state will be keeping an eye on as well. And so that, I think, is a clear difference between Rice and Mace. And then also, Rice really continued to take a hard line against Trump, whereas Mace sought to sort of cozy up to him and portray herself as still being in the pro-Trump camp, despite her occasional criticisms and despite him endorsing her opponent. So, it's clear that you can be against Trump to a point in these Republican primaries, depending on the situation. But there are some red lines that the voters will not allow you to cross.
Okay. Matt, I want to keep going around the map here, and let's head to Texas, where the first Mexican-born Congresswoman, Mayra Flores, she won in a special election, and she's a Republican. So do Democrats really need to be worried more about their past precedent, really, of counting on the Hispanic vote, especially in a place like Texas?
That's right. Look, Democrats have a lot of problems. Midterms were always going to be bad. They're almost always bad for the incumbent president's party. We have inflation, gas prices, a lot of environmental factors that I think favor Republicans. And then you have this. This is a trend that Democrats, you hear them talk about the coalition of the ascendant, well, maybe that doesn't materialize. I think that Democrats had believed, and apparently wrongly, that Hispanics were going to be a major part of their coalition, that immigration was the dominant issue, and that Republicans really had no chance. And I think what we're seeing are that Hispanics are identifying maybe more in terms of class. And right now, fair or not, the Republican Party is doing a better job of identifying as a working class political party than they ever did before. They used to be FDR, the working man's party with the Democratic Party. It seems to be changing, and it may be, certainly in places like South Texas, it appears to be the case that this is a trend, as if Democrats didn't have enough problem. A key part of their coalition that they thought they could take to the bank is peeling off. This is horrible news. Now, I do think in the specific case of this congressional race, Democrats could win it back. The district is going to become more Democratic, but the trend, I think, is unmistakable.
All right, well, we've got to leave it there. Matt Lewis and Molly Ball, thank you so much both for joining me this morning.
Thank you.
All right, still ahead, the average price for gasoline over $5 now. But if you're in one of the states where it's a lot higher, it's even more painful. Where drivers are particularly feeling the squeeze is next.
Hello and welcome to Inside Politics. I'm John King in Washington. Thank you for sharing your day with us. There is no escape, and we're coming to take you out and pull you out by your hairs. That rage from a man outside the Capitol on Insurrection Day is captured in a video just posted by the January 6th committee. That same man was part of a January 5th Capitol tour led by a Republican congressman. Plus, a big day in the inflation fight. The Federal Reserve weighs a dramatic hike in interest rates. The goal is to slow the economy and ease pressures driving up prices. The risk is stalling the economy and opening the door to recession. And primary lesson. South Carolina voters banish a Republican who voted to impeach Trump, while Nevada Republicans reward big lie proponents up and down the ballot. We're now almost halfway through the primary season in this midterm election year. 24 states have now held their primaries. Last night, several states and some important lessons. Let's begin out in Nevada with its Senate Republican primary. Donald Trump endorsed Adam Laxalt, He's a big election denier, and he won quite convincingly, 56% to 34% for Army veteran political newcomer Sam Brown. This is a Senate race in the fall that could determine control of the United States Senate. Republicans hope to pick this up from a Democratic incumbent. We'll see how that one plays out. So Trump's success there, if you will. Let's move now to House Republican primaries. Over here in South Carolina, it was a mixed verdict for the former president. First to this race here, Nancy Mace won renomination. She's an incumbent Republican congresswoman. Donald Trump wanted her booted. He wanted Republican voters to boot her, and he endorsed Katie Arrington because she said, especially after January 6th, some very unflattering things about Donald Trump. But Mace survives. But in this district up here, Donald Trump did get the revenge he wanted. Russell Fry will be the Republican nominee, likely the next congressman, because this is such a Republican district. Tom Rice, you see, a 2-to-1 win for Russell Fry. Even more than that, Tom Rice voted to impeach Donald Trump. He said he was proud of that vote, and he would stand by that vote. Tom Rice will now become a former congressman in January because of that. One other race I want to make note of moved down to a special election last night in the state of Texas. Now, we'll come down to the map and bring it out over here. You see the red down here, pop this out. In some ways, Democrats might say, oh, this race is insignificant because this is only to fill the remaining term. So this Mayra Flores will be the congresswoman only until January. The district has been redrawn. There'll be a new election in November. Democrats think they can win. But this used to be a Democratic seat. That a Republican won is proof to Republicans that Latino voters are now trending more and more their way, something to keep an eye on as we get close to November. But the Trump factor was the big issue last night, and in South Carolina, Nevada. Those who had his endorsement said, thank you, sir.
President Trump looked at this entire crowded field. Remember, we were at 14 people, I think, at one point. We had strong challengers, and he trusted us with his endorsement. Mr. President, thank you.
I would like to thank President Donald Trump for not only believing in me, but for believing in Nevada and leading an America First movement, a movement that is alive and well today here in Nevada.
CNN's Jeff Zeleny is just back from South Carolina here in D.C. Appreciate the quick trip back. Tom Rice will be former congressman. He says it's a badge of honor, but it tells you something about the Trump effect Republican voters if you openly defy him. Nancy Mace tried to have a more nuanced.
Without a doubt, you can cross him, if you will, but you can't defy him because that puts you on the other side of the electorate. And that was Tom Rice's problem. He wasn't only going after the former president at every turn, and it's so unusual to talk to a Republican who's willing to say what he will say out loud. He said Donald Trump is the past. He's a cancer on the party. But that put him crossways with the electorate. That clearly showed last night in the results. But I think at the end of the day, we can draw some lessons from South Carolina, and one is candidates matter. That is why Nancy Mace beat Katie Arrington. Republican voters there are well aware of the fact that Katie Arrington was the Republican nominee in 2020. She lost that seat to a Democrat. That was Nancy Mace's full message. So yes, Nancy Mace was, she had crossed Donald Trump, but was not anti-Trump. She embraced his policies. She embraced his sort of spirit, if you will. So candidates still absolutely matter in the race. And you cannot be sort of at odds with Republican voters. And that's what Tom Rice was.
And so the question is, does that carry over as we go through it? There were 10 House Republicans who voted to impeach Donald Trump. Last night was actually the first time one of them had a primary challenge. It was on the ballot in a primary challenge because of quirks. That's because 4 of them, you see them on the left of your screen here, decided not to seek re-election, so you don't find out what happens in the primary. Then you see the 4 in the middle there. They are all Republicans who voted to impeach Donald Trump. They all faced Trump-backed Republican challengers in August. So we're in the middle of June now. We got a ways to go to get there.
And this is Trump's #1 priority in so many ways, to defeat these people, to exact his revenge on people who openly defied him and crossed him. If you were any of these folks, particularly somebody like Liz Cheney, I mean, she might be #1 on his list of people he wants to see ousted. You have got to worry. You know, if you look at South Carolina, for instance, the Republican support for Donald Trump in South Carolina is 89%. I'm actually surprised it's not 99%. But if you look around in different states, it's similar. Republicans, by and large, embrace Donald Trump. They believe what he says about the election. So running against him, being virulently anti-Trump, is just not a winning strategy so far. I mean, we'll see. Liz Cheney is a horse of a different color because of her political pedigree, but the headwinds are tough.
And some of these races matter more than others because of the competitive nature come November. Those 2 South Carolina Republicans are likely to be congressmen now because they're Republican districts. But the Nevada A is a fascinating state. This is the Senate map. Remember, it's a 50-50 Senate, right? So control of the Senate is up. Adam Laxalt will be the candidate here. That's a Democratic-held seat right now. Republicans believe not only can they win that seat, they believe they can win the governor's race there. They also think they can pick up maybe 2 or 3 House districts there as well. One of the reasons they think that is because they think, and Donald Trump did this in the last presidential election, and the Republicans think they're seeing it continue, is improving standing among Latino voters.
Yes, and I do think we do see the shifts. We do see that some of the messaging from Republicans to Latino voters on jobs, on the economy, on the fact that perhaps Democrats' policies have made it worse to be an American, resonates with Latino voters, also, you know, some black male voters as well. I think in a general election, in a statewide election, in a state like Nevada, it's still going to be difficult for Republicans to win, especially on a message tied too close to President Trump. That could be a turnoff in a general election. But I think Republicans think that if they get enough support, they can push it through. It also depends on where our economy and all these other factors are come November.
But that's the key point there. But if you're just talking about can Democrats hold the Latino vote, it would matter here. It would matter here. You could argue it matters in the suburbs here. You could argue even it matters here. Yep. Black voter turnout is key there too. But in a very close race on the margins, if the Republicans are running a point or three better among Latino voters. So the question is, you know, MJ, will those candidates, those Democratic candidates, will they invite the president into hell?
That is a really, really good question. I think if you are a Democratic candidate and you potentially face a very competitive race come November, yeah, there's going to be wariness because of everything that you just laid out, particularly about the economy. The president is the face of the Democratic Party, and right now he is the person that is the easiest single individual for everybody to blame for all of the economic woes. So yeah, it is going to be difficult for some of these candidates to fathom the idea of bringing on stage the president who, again, sort of represents some of the hardships that we are seeing across the country when it comes to the economy.
It may not be fair, it may not be contextual, but welcome to politics, right?
We've seen it with every sitting president, always in the first midterm year. Do you bring the president out or not? There's also an argument, though, look, you know you're a Democrat, you had that D on your jersey, so why not at least try and get out some people who, you know, might like to see Air Force One land in your district? If you're the White House is still planning on sending President Biden out there to places like Wisconsin to go after Ron Johnson, but you know, it's hard to hide from your president and your party.
Ask Democrats who lost in 2010, who ran
was
from
it
Obama.
63 seats?
Yeah,
68 seats?
Yeah, that was 63 seats. It was. Up next, we continue the conversation, the big lie and the ballot box. Republican voters again reward election deniers. Despite all the new evidence that Team Trump knew, yes, Joe Biden won fair and square. An election denier in Nevada now one step closer to overseeing the very elections he calls rigged. Jim Marchant just won that state's Republican primary for Secretary of State. And Adam Laxalt, who's also known for pushing 2020 election lies, is now the Silver State's GOP nominee for Senate. Our great reporters are back with us. And that is one of the challenges in this election cycle. Even though we heard from everybody on Team Trump, the Attorney General, Trump's daughter, the campaign manager, people inside saying it's not true. We knew it wasn't true. We exhausted our options. Joe Biden won fair and square. You have these Republican candidates, let's listen, saying, nope, Joe Biden stole the election.
People are excited that there's somebody doing something behind the scenes to try to fix 2020, like President Trump said.
Well, there's no question that they rigged the election. There's no question that they set about changing the rules of the game.
So I'm thankful that that President Trump's loyal to those that stand for truth and are trying to fight for voting integrity in our state, which it needs to happen. I can't believe, Steve, that it's so hard to find out it actually happened in 2020.
Just a great example there. Republican candidate for governor in Pennsylvania, Republican candidate for Senate in Nevada, Republican candidate for Secretary of State in Nevada, the people who actually count the votes, who are, forgive me, living in a fantasy.
Yeah, listen, the saving grace of 2020, to the extent there was one, was that there were people in place who Donald Trump was pressuring to do his bidding and overturn the election. There were people who defied him all over the country, in places like Georgia, places like Arizona, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. Now what we see is that there are people who will likely be in place in 2022, 2024, who could actually do Donald Trump's bidding and are essentially saying they would, right? I think the gubernatorial candidate in Pennsylvania, I think, said, well, he would be in charge of this, appointing the Secretary of State, who, of course, would be over the election there. So, yeah, this is, you know, in some ways, 2020 was a bit of a dry run. In 2024 could actually, you could see what Donald Trump wanted to happen in 2020 actually happen.
And if you are an election denier, I mean, that in and of itself should be disqualifying if you are seeking any elected office. But the idea that there are candidates running for governor, for secretary of state, these roles that are so closely tied to overseeing election results of a state. I mean, that should be incredibly disturbing. And also, by the way, some of the sound that you played of these Republican candidates saying these conspiracy theories, we also don't even know that they actually believe that. It's very possible, as the January 6th hearings have shown, that they are saying it just for political effect. That's even more disturbing.
Well, but the cancer is in the system, if you will. Well, we need competitive political parties in the American democracy. We need people who respect the system and follow the rules. This is a lawsuit filed by the New Mexico Secretary of State against one of the counties in her state because the county commission refuses to certify election results from a primary that is over. One of the members of that county commission says this: I have huge concerns with these voting machines. I really do. I just don't think in my heart that they can't be manipulated. This is the Dominion voting fiasco that Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell set on America. Essentially, Hugo Chavez is somewhere in Venezuela from the grave manipulating voting machines. I mean, really?
Yeah, and Georgia is a Dominion state too, and Georgia's seen those types of attacks. And there are people that could be in really powerful positions that have worked hard to overturn and question the 2020 election. And again, when it comes to 2024, where there's likely to be another close presidential election, it could have grave impact. You know, there's been a lot of talk about how in Georgia, Brian Kemp and Secretary Raffensperger defeated Stop the Steal Republicans in their primary. But Georgia's lieutenant governor, the Republican candidate, is a Stop the Steal state senator. And in Georgia, the lieutenant governor position is very powerful. And so now I spoke to Democratic Rep. Nikema Williams at the first January 6th hearing, and that's what she said. She said she was disturbed, and she wants to hear from Senator Jones. Do you still believe this? Because you could be one of our state's top leaders.
It'll be interesting to see if the testimony from the Attorney General, Trump's campaign manager, people in Trump's White House counsel, Trump's daughter, convinces some of these Republicans to let it go. This car is already on the track, unfortunately, for this year, so they're not going to raise their hand and say they're wrong, but we'll see if anything can crack that spell. Attorney General Merrick Garland is in Buffalo, New York. Remember, 10 people killed there in a mass shooting at a grocery store. The new federal charges the suspected shooter faces. That's next.
And let's talk about these primary elections yesterday. Tom Rice, who voted for or in support of impeachment for the president, former president, lost his primary. Nancy Mace, she won. You tweeted out that people are reading way too much into this. Why?
Look, this is about South Carolina. People are really like to look at that and say, look, you know, this is because Tom Rice voted to impeach and Nancy Mace refused to support overturning the election, but then tried to back off and make nice with Trump. That's a fundamental misreading of the facts on the ground, it seems to me. Here's what you got to keep in mind. Rice's district is northern coastal South Carolina, Myrtle Beach. Just to use an example, Horry County, which is the county that encloses Myrtle Beach, went for Donald Trump 2-1. So it is a hardcore Trump area, and that turnout for Republican primary is going to be even more so. Nancy Mace's district, where my parents live, 1st District, South Carolina, Charleston County, went for Joe Biden by 12 points. It is just much more of a swing district, and a more moderate group of Republicans are going to turn out. That's why she pulled it out. So I think it's just important to remember the all politics local and put it through that prism.
All right. Do you think there's anything, arguably the person at the top of the congressional hit list for former President Trump is Vice Chair of this committee, Liz Cheney?
Oh, I don't think there's any argument about that.
Is there
I think
anything
you got it.
that can be extrapolated to that race in Wyoming?
Look, John's right. All politics is local. All you have to do is look at that race. And Liz Cheney, there is I don't know a pollster in America who could look at polling in Wyoming and say Liz Cheney's got a path to pull this out. It is going to be, I think her race looks a lot like Tom Rice's race. And by the way, her district looks a lot like Wyoming.
But look, we're playing for history stakes here. Remember, politics is history in the present tense. And if Tom Rice and Liz Cheney are trying to do the right thing by history's eyes, to be honorable, to insist on the truth against lies, they'll be vindicated in the eyes of history. And they'll have a longer future than folks who are trying to double down for short-term gain.
You know, you can die on that moral hill, but then you don't have the responsibility of the American people at your behest in order to do the right thing. But God, I'd like to see her still in Congress.
John, Margaret, thank you.
Good to see you, man.
All right. Extreme weather, coast to coast. In the Midwest, dangerously high temperatures have knocked out power for thousands of people, and record rainfall at Yellowstone National Park could force it to stay closed for quite a while. We'll take you there. Donald Trump's grip on the GOP was evident in several critical battleground states last night. We got a glimpse of how much he could sway the midterms this November. CNN political director David Chalian is here to break it all down for us. So, David, good to see you. Let's start with South Carolina. Split decision there. What do we need to know?
Well, split decision in terms of the Trump endorsement tracker, but it really is a win-win for Donald Trump. Here's why. Take a look in this congressional district, the 7th congressional district. Tom Rice, one of the 10 Republicans who voted to impeach Donald Trump, Victor, so a clear target of the former president's, he comes up with a big loss here. He only got 24.7% of the vote. Russell Fry, the Trump-backed candidate, 51% of the vote. Now, that indicates conservative Republican primary voters in South Carolina, if you go as far as to impeaching Donald Trump, well, you are no longer welcome to be the representative there. Take a look in the 1st congressional district down here in the Charleston area. Nancy Mace, she wins this race, 53.1% of the vote. Now, she did not have Donald Trump's endorsement. Katie Arrington did. But Nancy Mace did not go as far as voting to impeach Donald Trump. She said some critical things in the aftermath of January 6th. She actually voted to certify the 2020 election as legitimate. Yes, he endorsed against her, but what else did she do? She spent the entirety of this race trying to affiliate herself with Donald Trump. She went up to Trump Tower, filmed a video in front of it. So Trump either gets his revenge, getting somebody who impeached him out, or he gets his revenge because he makes someone he's not supporting sort of grovel for his support as well. So a win-win for Donald Trump in South Carolina.
Let's go to Nevada now. Good night for people back in the big lie there.
Well, I'm going to go a little further down the ballot to the Secretary of State primary in Nevada. Take a look. This is the Republican primary. Jim Marchant, 38% of the vote. He's the winner. This is the Republican nominee to be Secretary of State in a critical battleground state, Nevada, to have oversight over the elections there. And he is an election denier from 2020. So this is the real world, still modern day, not looking back to January 6th, but today and going forward, potential threat to sort of our democracy, to the foundations of free and fair elections. He is now the Republican nominee in Nevada. Also, I just want to show you in Nevada, in the Senate race there, one of the key contests of the cycle, Victor, if I can get to it. You'll see here Adam Laxalt, who had the support of Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump. He's the big winner in the Republican nomination. He'll go up against Catherine Cortez Masto, one of the vulnerable incumbent Democrats. The entire control of the U.S. Senate could come down to this race.
All right, crucial race there. Takes us to Texas and this special election victory for the GOP.
Yeah, I think this race is important to pay attention to. It's down here in the Brownsville area of Texas, down in the Rio Grande Valley. Maya Flores, a Republican, wins this race. It's a special election. This was a Democratic-held seat. This district is one that Joe Biden won by 4 points in 2020. The Democratic congressman left Congress to become a lobbyist. The special election now produces a flip for Republicans. Nancy Pelosi's Democratic majority in the House just shrunk by 1 seat in advance of this tough midterm cycle. The thing that's key to watch here, Victor, is, you know, we talk about it all the time. Republicans have been making inroads specifically with Latino voters, very heavily Latino district here. And this is a warning sign to Democrats that in a Biden district, heavily Latino, Republicans were able to make gains here. Now, come November, these lines have been redrawn. This district is likely to be much more Democratic. But for the moment, a warning sign for Democrats about their relationship with Latino voters given this economy. Victor?
Something to watch. David Chalian watching it all for us. Thank you very much, David.
Sure.
2 California police officers were killed in an ambush while trying to protect a family. We have details of this ahead.
Tonight, Republicans say they have found their blueprint for success after flipping a House seat in South Texas. Mira Flores defeating Democrat Dan Sanchez, eating into the Democrats' slim majority in the House, which is now at just 10 seats. And in a memo obtained by CNN, the Republican Party says, quote, Flores' victory is proof that Republicans have a winning message with Hispanic voters and that no Democrat is safe in the current political environment. Boris Sanchez is out front.
A historic victory in South Texas, signaling a potential political realignment. Republican Mayra Flores flipping a long-held Democratic seat in a special election, winning more than 50% of the vote, beating her Democratic rival by more than 7 points, and becoming the country's first Mexican-born member of Congress. The GOP's first House pickup since Democrats took control of Congress in 2020, coming in one of the most Hispanic areas of the country. 85% of the district's residents are Latino, and Flores' victory is being touted by Republican leadership as a blueprint for success.
I was born in Burgos, Tamaulipas, Mexico, but at 6, we immigrated to the RGV. We grew up modest, working in the cotton fields. Honest pay for honest work.
Running a pro-Trump, anti-abortion, and pro-Second Amendment campaign, Flores touted her husband's experience as a Border Patrol agent to call for a crackdown on immigration in a district that runs more than 80 miles along the Mexican border. Flores also used several QAnon-related hashtags in some of her social media posts, though she later disavowed the conspiracy theory, telling the San Antonio Express News, quote, "I've never been supportive of it." CNN reached out to Flores' campaign for comment. She has not yet replied.
We have to state the facts that under President Trump, we did not have this mess in this country.
Though President Biden won nearly 2/3 of Latino voters nationwide in 2020, former President Trump outperformed expectations.
But the question was whether those gains with Hispanic voters were specific to Trump. The special election in Texas gave us a specific piece of evidence that the gains Republicans are making aren't necessarily tied to Trump and could be part of a broader trend away from Democrats and toward the Republican Party.
When Democrat Filemon Vela announced his resignation in March, Republicans thrust more than $1 million into ads for Flores, both in English and Spanish.
I've always said South Texas is Republican, they just don't know it.
National Democrats declined to spend heavily in the race, partly because Flores will have to run again in November, when the newly drawn 34th district will be more friendly to Democrats.
While I think it's going to be difficult for her to win re-election in a reconfigured district that is more Democratic, I think this sends a larger message that Republicans do have an opportunity to gain ground with Hispanic voters, and that has the potential to give them opportunities in other districts that aren't as Democratic.
And Aaron, I've been speaking to Republican strategists about this dynamic going back to 2020, and they are bullish on this. They're practically salivating at their opportunity with Latino voters, because if you go back a decade to 2012, after Mitt Romney lost, they did this autopsy that made clear that Republicans struggle demographically. They have an aging voting base, and they see this as their best opportunity to win, especially going into 2024. So you're looking at states like Florida, Colorado, Nevada, even New Mexico could be in play for them.
Wow. All right. Well, they did the autopsy, spent the time. All right. Thanks so much, Boris, with that report. And I want to go now to Xochitl Hinojosa, former DNC communications director, who is from the district that Flores just won, and Scott Jennings, CNN political commentator and former senior advisor to Mitch McConnell. So, Xochitl, let me start with you. You hear Boris giving the important context here. Okay, she's got to run again in November, and the district's shifting, which Democrats use to dismiss this victory. But obviously, Republicans see it very differently. How big of a red flag is this loss for Democrats?
Well, this district is not necessarily a red flag because it will turn blue in November. These were old redistricting lines. The new redistricting lines is a plus 15 towards Dems. What I will say, though, is that Republicans are taking a victory lap, and they're taking a victory lap on 7% turnout. This wasn't a persuasion issue. This was a turnout issue. It's not that Hispanic voters turned out for Republicans the way that they claim that they are, and they believe that this will translate in places like Nevada and Arizona. This is the fact that Democrats didn't actually spend enough money to turn their people out. And that's what the red flag is. The red flag is when you're a party in power, you have to motivate your voters, motivate your base, and give them a reason to turn out. And you have to spend that money in order to turn out Hispanic, Black voters, women, young voters. And they didn't do that in this election.
Okay, Scott, to the point that Xochitl just made, 7% is bad. I mean, even here in New York, where turnout is usually abysmal, I mean, that is bad. That's like one of the lowest turnouts I've ever heard. So what do you say to her point, right, that this is a turnout story, not a persuasion story about Hispanic voters?
Well, I agree. It is a turnout story. And the story is
Democrats who usually vote Democrat have no interest in turning out right now. I mean, that's how bad it is. In an 85% Hispanic registered district that's gone for Obama, that's gone for Clinton, that's gone for Biden, Democrats stayed home. And the Hispanics who voted there, I agree it was a low turnout election, but the Hispanic voters who came out wanted to vote Republican. And so the big story here isn't about the House Republican majority, which I think we're going to pick up with or without this district. The story is it true that what we're seeing in polling can come to life in a real-life situation? Are Hispanics who are polling more Republican gonna vote Republican? And I think we saw some proof of concept here. So to me, the story isn't really about this Texas district. It's about the Nevada Senate race, the Arizona Senate race, the Colorado Senate race, and all these other places that have Hispanic voters who aren't woke, but they are broke, and they're mad as hell, and they're fixing to do something about it.
So I want to let's kind of broaden this out a little bit. Tesla CEO Elon Musk says he voted for Miraflores in Texas. Everyone may remember, right? He now has that as his residency. He said it's the first time that he has voted for a Republican. And then today he responded to someone on Twitter saying he's now leaning towards the Florida Governor Ron DeSantis for president in 2024. Ron DeSantis came out and responded to that today. Here he is.
Elon Musk. So what I would say, I'm focused on 2022, but with Elon Musk, what I would say is, I welcome support from African Americans. What can I say?
Right, Scott, that's the joke line that he makes. Elon Musk, of course, is from South Africa. But look, he raises a point. There's a lot of buzz about DeSantis. I mentioned the, $120 million re-election pool that he has. That's for governor of Florida. Does he translate into a serious threat to Trump right now nationally, Scott?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you're somebody who thinks we've got to move on from Trump, but you want some of what Trump represented, the fighting spirit, taking on the media, having all the right enemies in the progressive left, then DeSantis checks a lot of those boxes, but he doesn't carry a lot of the same baggage. He doesn't have the baggage of Washington. He doesn't have the baggage of January 6th. He doesn't have, a lot of what comes with Trump. So he is somebody that people love because he has candidly all the right enemies. And Republicans love Florida. They think he's led it in a fashion that they would love to see someone lead this country. So now, what's holding DeSantis back? If he plus 8 or 9 other people run in the Republican primary against Trump, then fragmentation of the field becomes Trump's best friend.
Right. Now, of course, there are plenty of Democrats in Florida who love that Ron DeSantis kept Florida open. Not the same thing as voting for him. But obviously, it's just a point, Sochi, that, he's a complicated guy in some ways. And when you look at it, who as a Democrat would you rather run against, Trump or DeSantis?
Well, I mean, I think that they both are very problematic. And you've heard President Biden say before that he wouldn't mind running against Trump again. And I think that is, some of what a lot of people in our party believe. At the same time, DeSantis also has a record. And one thing that came out today that you've reported on is the fact that children under 5 are going to get vaccinated soon, but yet, Florida hasn't necessarily pre-ordered those vaccines for those children. So he has a record, and Democrats will use that against him.
Sochi, Scott, thanks both. Appreciate it. And next, the U.S. providing Ukraine with another $1 billion in aid as Zelensky pleads for more weapons and says it is literally life or death as the 200 Ukrainians are dying a day on the battlefield. How many weapons can the U.S. provide? Plus, it's one of the most dangerous places in the world to be a journalist, a place where just reporting on a crime can get you killed. And tonight, we'll take you there.
As the January 6th committee does its work, the faction of the Republican Party that supports the lie that the 2020 election was stolen is gaining a hold on the party ahead of elections. Tuesday's primary contest notched a lot of big wins for backers of the former president, including the defeat of one of the 10 Republican House members who voted to impeach. Harry Enten, our favorite and only senior data reporter, joins us now. So how bad did Congressman Rice lose? Or badly, I guess I should.
How bad did he lose? I think so. Look, I failed 7 grammar quizzes in 8th grade. Forget it. Look, I don't know about you, but my friends are spreadsheets and Coke Zero. And we decided to do a little work earlier today, and we went in, and I believe we have found something historic. Tom Rice getting less than 25% of the vote was the worst performance for a House incumbent in a primary this entire century.
Really?
Really. Really. It was really the worst. The closest was, I think, William Jefferson in Louisiana in 2008.
Wait, when you say this century, you're talking about this century and the last century?
No, I'm talking about the 21st century.
Oh, Oh, okay. All
Yeah,
right,
yeah,
right,
this
okay.
century.
All right,
Yes,
this
yes,
century.
yes, yes, yes. William Jefferson, who was basically a convicted felon or was going to be, came the closest with just a little bit more than 25%. But Tom Rice, by far, basically the worst performance for an incumbent. Now, this isn't really surprising to me, though, right? Because if you look at the polling and you say should Republicans, you ask them, should the party be accepting of those who voted to impeach Donald Trump? The vast majority say, no, the party should not. And this, I think, is the result that you essentially see, which is Rice going down to truly a historic defeat.
So let's talk about Wyoming and Congresswoman Cheney. How do things look for her?
Well, if you watch what happened in South Carolina, I bet you can guess. Not particularly good.
Is that your South Carolina accent?
I don't know what that accent is. Anything that's off of New York. Sometimes I almost sound like I'm from Minnesota. I say Chicago. So sometimes that's also an accent. I play around with it. Whatever. My voice is weird.
I say Manhattan because I can't say two T's together.
Wow.
Yeah, Budden, Manhattan.
I say a lot of things really strangely. Sometimes I can't say Quinnipiac University. Any event. On Cheney, if you go over to Wyoming, look at her disapproval rating. And essentially what you see is that it has doubled, more than doubled, gone up by 40 points from before she voted to impeach Donald Trump to after voting to impeach Donald Trump.
That's amazing.
That is amazing. She is very much unpopular in the state. And if you look at the betting odds, whether or not she'll win re-election, only about a 10% chance that she will win re-election according to the betting markets at this point.
I mean, given the political dynasty she's from, their roots in the state, I mean, that's incredible.
It's incredibly low. It just shows the power of Trump.
And is that an indication of how prevalent those beliefs are, or the beliefs on the big lie are in the Republican Party?
Absolutely. The vast majority of Republicans believe this garbage that is the big lie. We've seen it in poll after poll after poll. More than 60% believe that the election was a fraud, which obviously we know is not the case. And if you look at the elections that have been held so far this year, who are the GOP nominating? They are nominating a ton of people who tried to undermine the 2020 election, both for Congress and in state legislative races in key states like Texas and Pennsylvania and North Carolina. And so to me, Donald Trump, the power of Trump, is very much in the Republican Party right now.
Harry Enten, appreciate it. Thank
Hey,
you.
and I think I made the slides pretty clear tonight.
I think you did.
My girlfriend will be very proud of me.
They were very, very
Thank
clear.
you.
Perspective now from David Urban, CNN political commentator and former campaign strategist, the former president, and David Axelrod, a CNN senior political commentator who served as senior advisor to President Obama. David Axelrod, if you were advising Congresswoman Cheney in her campaign and you still had until August, what would you be recommending they do? I mean, is there anything?
Well, honestly, every time she speaks at these hearings, she's probably making her task even more difficult. And I think the one hope they have is that Democrats re-register and cross over in record numbers to support her. But honestly, I think, you heard Harry's over-caffeinated analysis, but accurate one. She's in a world of hurt, and no sensible person in politics would bet on her renomination at this point.
David Urban, it's fascinating to me, just her story being now rejected by her own party, the party her father was loyal to for decades, for refusing to go along with this idea that the election was stolen.
Yeah, so Anderson, let's just remember, right, like the Republican primaries are dominated, just like Democratic primaries are dominated by the activists in the party, right? So there are a very small number, not a small number, I shouldn't say a small number, but a very vocal number of Republican primary voters who embrace this and who are out there fervently, supporting, the opponents of Congressman Rice and Congresswoman Cheney in these matters. But, you look at the states like in Pennsylvania, in past states where there are multiple candidates running, and for example, in Pennsylvania, the Republican governor's nominee there, didn't get the majority of the votes still amongst the Republican primary voters. So I wouldn't go, too far and say that all Republicans believe this. All Republicans fervently believe that. There is a strong portion of it that believes very strongly.
I mean, let me just show you the graphic here. Do you believe? The question was asked. Do you believe Joe Biden won the 2020 election? Only 30% said fair and square. 61% said due to voter fraud.
Right. No, and I don't disagree with that.
That's not a small minority.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that analysis, but that doesn't necessarily mean they buy into everything that President Trump is saying, and that that they don't believe that he's a duly elected president, and on and on. I think that. Look, Rice got blown out, as Harry said, unprecedented. I don't know who those 10% of people are that are going to bet for Cheney's reelection. She's toast. It's over. It's no small miracle that any of these people stayed in to run. Of the 10 that voted for impeachment, they all got smoked. Nancy Mace, hung on because she was in a very different district last night, and she didn't vote for impeachment. She voted, for just to certify the election. So. If you cross the president on this one, you were going to go down. I mean, I think there was no doubt.
Do you think, David Axelrod, I mean, how big a concern is this? Should this be to everybody that people who believe the election was fraudulent, who believe the lies that the former president is telling, are now running to be in positions where they will oversee elections in their states?
Listen, I think this is a hugely important issue. Just last night in Nevada, we saw a candidate for Secretary of State win, and he ran on the platform that the election was stolen, and he is amplifying those lies and essentially signaling that he would govern the election process there with those conspiracy theories in mind. And we're seeing that replicated in many other battleground states, in Arizona, Wisconsin, in Michigan. In Pennsylvania, the gubernatorial candidate that Dave mentions has the ability to appoint a Secretary of State, and he is the most vociferous trafficker of the big lie, maybe in American politics. And by the way, while David says he represents the fringes of the Republican Party, or the activist base of the Republican Party, there was a poll out today that showed him running within 4 points of the Democratic nominee.
Yeah, but
this is a huge problem.
David Urban, does it concern you? The same question I asked Axelrod.
Yeah, sure. Of course it does. Anderson, we want everybody, I think, believes in election integrity, right? We all want election integrity, and so. What does that mean? What does it mean? Like in Pennsylvania, right? I participated in this recount, right? And when you get down to these county levels, you see, just how our elections are run, and I don't think there's nefarious, actors here. I think it's more of, it's politics is messy, government's messy. It doesn't really work as nicely as we'd like to see happen. And so I think we can improve our elections. I think there are lots of things we can do to improve our elections. I think people deserve to know them when they go to the polls.
But there's not widespread voter fraud.
No. I agree with you 100%.
Right.
But what are we doing that people in America believe this? Why do people think that they can go to why aren't people, they go to their ATM and deposit their paychecks, but they're without pause, but they're afraid to vote on a machine? Something's going on in America. We need to get to the bottom of it so people feel that they're comfortable, going to vote.
Right, but the president of the United States is not telling people that their ATMs are out to screw them and is lying to them.
Exactly.
Makes a
but
difference.
Anderson,
you don't have to be Sherlock Holmes on this one.
All right.
You don't have to be Sherlock Holmes on this one, Dave. I mean, the president's told them this, and he has made it stick. And it is now a pandemic of mistrust within the Republican Party, and it's infecting our elections right now.
Yeah.
Well, we need Republicans to show up. We need Republicans to vote by absentee. We need all the people to turn out, just like we saw in Georgia, in that Georgia Senate election, when the president discouraged people to vote. It cost us the election.
David Urban, David Axelrod, good conversation. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thousands of visitors forced out of Yellowstone National Park. Details ahead.
Yeah.